A big story in the news over the weekend is the 5-year anniversary of the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers. It was September 15th, 2008, that Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. And now there is a lot of talk on all of the news shows looking back over the past 5 years. Where are we? How far have we come? What caused it? What lessons have we learned? Of course, conspicuously absent from a lot of the dialogue, at least here in the U.S., is me, or maybe other people who might have actually predicted the 2008 financial crisis. The media doesn't want to remind the public about the voices who were warning about the crisis because they don't like what those voices are still warning today. Remember, 5 years ago, when the government allowed Lehman Brothers to go bankrupt, that was the last thing that they got right. Everybody thinks allowing the bankruptcy was what they did wrong. No, it was creating the financial conditions that made that bankruptcy inevitable. That's what the government did wrong. It was the Federal Reserve and it was the government, bad combination of bad monetary, fiscal, and regulatory policy that sowed the seeds of the housing bubble that led to the financial crisis and, of course, the bankruptcy of Lehman. The fact that more banks were not allowed to fail, that's simply helping to produce the greater economic crisis that's just around the corner. Of course, the people who didn't understand the problem back then still don't understand the problem. Two, in particular, are former Congressman Barney Frank and former Senator Chris Dodd, who happened to be on CNBC this morning rewriting history. And Andy Ross Sorkin, who was conducting the interview, basically lobbing them softballs, letting them get away with outright lies. I'm going to take one in particular to task, and that is Barney Frank. Not that I want to let Chris Dodd off the hook. These are two of the biggest congressional culprits in the housing bubble and the financial crisis. Of course, it's ironic that they were the ones that wrote the signature legislation, Dodd-Frank, supposedly to get rid of too big to fail, but really codified it so that now all the banks that were deemed too big to fail are even bigger. They're still going to fail. It's just going to cost us more. But listen to what Barney Frank had the gall to say on CNBC today, where he claimed that he was never on board with housing, that he was an advocate of renting. And in fact, according to Barney Frank, he was warning everybody. He was concerned back in 2004 about a potential housing crisis, about a bubble, and that he tried legislatively in 2004 to do something to defuse this ticking time bomb, but that the Republicans wouldn't allow. Listen to what this guy had to say with a straight face. This is earlier today on CNBC.
My position was, even with Fannie, that we should be doing for low-income people rental housing. And I have been a strong pusher for rental housing. But in terms of home ownership, I've been skeptical. And we did try, in 2004, Democrats in the House tried to pass a bill. Mel Watt took the lead on this to stop the bad mortgages. And DeLay said you can't do that.
Okay. Now, I'm going to play some sound from Congressman Barney Frank in 2005. A year after, he now claims that he was skeptical. And here he is on the House floor trying to diffuse the efforts underway to try to do something about a potential housing bubble. And here you have Barney Frank trying to basically dismiss those concerns. He's saying that there's nothing to worry about, that those people who are concerned about the problems in the housing market are wrong, that there's no reason to be concerned. There's nothing to worry about. There is no housing bubble. This is not like the dot-com stocks, right? Housing is fundamentally sound. There's no need to worry. Sure, the prices can ebb and flow, but everything is sound and there is nothing to worry about. Here, I'm going to play the first of these two clips right now.
This is a very important resolution, particularly at this time, because we have, I think, an excessive degree of concern right now about home ownership and its role in the economy. Obviously, speculation is never a good thing. But those who argue that housing prices are now at the point of a bubble seem to me to be missing a very important point. unlike previous examples we have had, where substantial excessive inflation of prices later caused some problems, we are talking here about an entity, home ownership, homes, where there is not the degree of leverage that we have seen elsewhere.
So here you have Barney Frank claiming to have been concerned about problems in the housing market back in 2004, telling his colleagues in the House that concerns about the housing market are excessive. Now, far from excessive, they weren't concerned enough. They weren't nearly concerned enough. But the level of concern that actually was developing back in 2005, according to Barney Frank, it was excessive. He was saying that there's nothing to worry about, that everything is fine. There's no bubble. We don't have to worry about home ownership. This is what he actually said. In contrast to what he's telling Andy Ross Sorkin this morning on CNBC, that he was Mr. Concern, that he was skeptical, that he was trying to warn his colleagues, but the Republicans stopped him. It's actually the reverse. There were some Republicans that were trying to warn their colleagues, and it was Barney Frank that put a stop to it. Now, here's the real money clip. I'm going to play one more clip from 2005.
This is not the dot-com situation. We have problems with people having invested in business plans for which there was no reality, and people building fiber optic cable for which there was no need. Homes that are occupied may see an ebb and flow in the price at a certain percentage level, but you're not going to see the collapse that you see when people talk about a bubble. And so those of us on our committee in particular will continue to push for home ownership.
There it is, his words. I will continue to push for home ownership. Today on CNBC, he claims that he was pushing for rental housing. I never pushed for home ownership. Oh, really? There is Barney Frank on the floor of the House of Representatives pushing for home ownership and trying to push against any regulatory effort to rein in the activities of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, some of his biggest contributors that were keeping him in office. What did he say? This is not a bubble. Prices aren't going to come down. There is no reason for concern. Yes, we could get an ebb and flow, yeah, putting it mildly. But hey, owner-occupied housing, there's nothing to worry about. Those of you who are worried about the economy or the banks or any of that, any negative effects that the housing market might have, don't worry. There's nothing to worry about. Don't regulate Fannie and Freddie. Don't crack down on the speculation because, hey, this is not the dot-com bubble. Well, he was right about one thing. It wasn't the dot-com bubble. It was a lot worse than the dot-com bubble. The speculation was even more rampant than it was in the dot-com. And thanks to the efforts of guys like Barney Frank, the big risk was in the lenders, because in the dot-com bubble, people were gambling with their own money. In the housing market, thanks to the government, thanks to Barney Frank and his buddy Chris Dodd, homeowners were gambling with taxpayer money, with bank money, with accounts that were insured by the FDIC. It was the government that was responsible. The government orchestrated this crisis from cradle to grave. And now you have the principal conspirators, the principal agents of cause in the House, 5 years later, on television set, rewriting history, and the conventional media eating it up. That's why you got to continue to listen to the Peter Schiff Show to get the facts, because I'm not going to let guys like Barney Frank get away with this nonsense. I'm going to call them out on that. And fortunately, you've got the live video records there on YouTube. You can't hide from the truth anymore because it comes back and bites you in the you-know-what. Anyway, you're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.